Alright, hello guys, welcome to this video. Today we're going to be talking about grand solar minimum since I've been getting so many comments about this and a lot of misconceptions and overhype here. I want to start out by showing you guys this little chart here, 400 years of sunspot observations. Now you'll see the Maunder minimum on the very left and mini ice age. Now this was considered a mini ice age and it was very cold winters with not so hot summers. That's what it really was, and a lot of glaciers expanded in Alaska, areas like Sweden, Norway, areas like that. Glaciers really expanded. You'll also notice towards the right, modern maximum right here, and this is what we've been in since 1950. We've been getting these really maxed out maximums, and these maximums, what they are is you'll see this blue line, how it goes up and down. That's our normal cycle. So the bottom is the minimums and the top is the maximums. These aren't grand solar maximums and minimums, these are just minimums and maximums. Grand is when it's prolonged and it completely changes the cycle. So these are the normal cycle deviations, I guess you could say. And you'll see we're approaching the modern minimum that's expected by 2020 or 2050. So somewhere in that time frame we're expected to arrive, and it will probably last around 50 years. Now, what exactly does this mean? I did a little drawing here on this chart, and you can see the red is where the maximums peak out at, and the blue is where the minimums are at their minimum. Notice that the blue doesn't change whether we're in a minimum or a maximum. That's because usually minimums are already at 0 sunspots per day, or just near it. So there's not really, you can't go lower than 0. So the minimums will not change. Just to name a few, minimums was 2009 to 2010 winter, 2010 to 2011, very cold winters. Also a few of the early 90 winters. Winters like that were minimums, and I'm gonna show you guys in a minute my anomalies that I compiled of all the minimum years and how those winters ended up being. But here under the modern minimum, you'll notice I made that purple zone. That's where the maximums will be. There won't be any maximums, or barely. There will barely be any maximums. So it'll always be kind of like a minimum. Will be almost at 0 sunspots most of the time, similar to the Maunder minimum here where you see those red X's. There's barely any that go any higher than just 10 or 20 per day, which is very low. So here's my anomalies of the minimum years, and you'll notice that it's very cold basically the entire United States. This is because some years were warm in the east and some years were warm in the west. Some years were cold in the west and some years were cold in the east, so it averages out at just cold everywhere, because where it was colder than it was warmer where it was warmer, if that makes any sense. I know that's kind of a tongue twister, but it will still be warm on one half of the United States almost every year, warmer than average, and it will be colder than average on one half of the United States almost every year. That will not change. There will still be troughs and there will still be ridges. That's really important. That's a misconception I hear. Everybody thinks that it's going to be colder everywhere. That's just not the case. There's still going to be above average areas. Now, here's a little closer look at our solar cycle. Here's solar cycle 23 and 24. So at the solar minimum after solar cycle 23 is when it was the 2008, 2009, 2010 winters, very cold winters. And then we had this little bit of a maximum. See, it peaked out right around 2014, but this maximum wasn't very strong, so we had a lot of colder winters in there because it wasn't very much of a maximum at all. You see, we're approaching a normal minimum. Whether the grand solar minimum is approaching or not, we are approaching a real minimum where there will be under 10 sunspots per day most likely. Now, this means that we will have some of those colder winters most likely. I am a believer in the sunspot activity and how that correlates to colder winters. A lot of people aren't, and a lot of people think that I don't believe in that. I do believe in that, and I've seen it with my own eyes, like the winters of 08, 09, 010, so things like that I have noticed. So I am a believer, unlike some people. Now, I don't believe that the grand solar minimum will lead to these insanely cold winters from the west coast to the east coast, and everywhere is going to be cold and all that. because a lot of comments were on my winter forecast, which is interesting because I called for very cold temperatures and polar vortex over the Great Lakes. I am calling for a very cold winter where it's going to be cold. The problem that people have is that I'm calling for warmer on the west coast. Whether it's grand solar minimum or not, there's going to be a warmer area, and that's just where it's going to be. So we're approaching a possible grand solar minimum. We don't really know when it's going to be, but we know that the maximums have been getting smaller. Weakening solar cycles since cycle 21 peaked around 1980. You can see all the maximums are smaller. So like I said in that illustration that I drew for you guys, those maximums are going to get smaller and smaller until they're almost non-existent. And then there won't be any of those warmer solar cycles. So I hope this cleared up a lot of questions that you guys had, and a lot of the people who have heard a lot about the solar maximum and solar minimum and grand solar minimum and that. This is my take on it. It's really a unproven science, and it's all speculation at this point because we don't really know how much of an impact it has, and it's really debatable. But this is my take on it. And whether you guys like it or not, there will be a warmer area every winter. There will be an above average area during the winter. So my forecast completely correlates with if there's going to be a solar minimum. I've taken that into account, and that's what my forecast is also taking into account. Anyway, I hope you guys have a great day.